more thing we're going to do here before we button everything else up. We're just going to run a leak down test. We've already done it here, but we figured we'll film it this time. We did it on the 26th before. This is basically just a guarantee that anything you've done already has properly been installed and seals. So ring seal and valve seat seal, valve 2 seat seal. Anywhere on a unbroken or an engine that hasn't been broken in yet, you can see anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20 psi of leak down before it's broken in. Anything better than that obviously is very, very good. But we're going to go ahead now. We're just going to verify that we have cylinder sealing, and then we'll carry on to the rest of the assembly.
Mission tripping, yeah. First class, my feet up, high in the air, on business, yeah. First class, yeah. Off and none, off and none. She told me don't let up, it's honest to make us, it's honest to crush, yeah. That ain't your budget, but that ain't your budget.
All right, we have gone ahead. We've done our leak down test for all 6 cylinders. We are 10% or under, which is really, really good for an engine that's not broken in. So this will live a happy life sealed, and should break in very, very well. So what we're going to do now, we're going to finish putting together the front of the engine. We do have a crank pulley to install, front cover, a couple little things. Not a lot of detail we're going to go into on that. We're just going to finish up the rest of this. All right, so before we put our ATI pulley on, we're going to go ahead and install our front cover. We're just going to be using new hardware, new cover. The ATI crank pulleys are very difficult to install, so we're going to make sure we have everything on the engine 100% up to snuff, which is why we replaced the front cover. It wasn't in good shape, so we're going to go ahead and do that now so you don't have to fight with the pulley to get it off later. All right, we're going to go ahead now. We're going to torque our front cover to 6 foot-pounds. Okay, next up we're going to go ahead and install our crank pulley. I like to put a little bit of anti-seize inside of the snout here, and then slip it on the crank, put your bolt in, and then slowly work it back. Make sure your woodruff key is not angling up and getting stuck behind you. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, once we got the crank pulley installed and seated, we're going to torque it down now to 239 foot-pounds. All right, next up here, we're just going to be putting on our serpentine belt tensioner. It has a Titan Motorsports billet pulley on here. So we're going to go ahead now, just with our standard M8 bolts. A little bit of Loctite. I like these Loctite anytime there's hardware inside of the timing cover, just to prevent any chance of a bolt backing out and landing inside the timing belt. Once you have them all in place, we're going to torque that down to 15 foot-pounds. Okay, now that we have the front of the engine buttoned up, we're going to go ahead now and install the 3 or 4 oil plugs and coolant plugs that we have on this side of the engine here. This first one we're going to have here is just for this front 1/8 BSPT cross-drilled plug. BSPT plugs on these, 1/8 MPT, or sorry, 1/8 BSPT, and there's one here and there's one here. This is typically for the factory oil pressure sensor, or switch, I guess it would be. So you'll often see these on the 2JZ GTE. Okay, now that we've got all of our block plugs in, oil and coolant, we're going to go ahead and install the heater hose tube. This heater hose tube, I believe, has been modified. We put a little bit of heat tape on here, so we're just going to go ahead and install that now. I'm not sure what exactly the plan is for his heater lines, so we're just going to install what he provided for now, and then we'll move on to installing the valve covers. Once you have the pipe installed, we're just going to go ahead and torque that down to 15 foot-pounds. Okay, we're gonna go ahead now and install the plugs in the rear of the block oil main line. Again, just purple thread locker and slash sealant on the center of the plug. And then we're gonna go ahead and place them in the block. All right, the final and last step we're going to be doing on this 2JZ build here is putting on a set of billet valve covers. So these ones are really nice. They do just use the OEM valve cover gasket, so that'll be nice and simple for us. We're just going to make sure that the baffles are sealed and torqued, and then we'll go ahead and pop the gasket in and install it to the engine, just like the factory valve cover gaskets. So once we get that valve cover cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and install it. Okay, now that we've got all the bolts in, we're going to torque these down to 5 foot-pounds. Okay, now that we have our valve cover prepped, we're going to go ahead, just quickly rubbing alcohol at the top of our cylinder head, get rid of any oil and debris that might be on there. Particularly going to focus on these corners here, make sure there's no oil on the cam cap. We're going to place our little dabs of silicone in each corner, and then we'll go ahead and install our valve cover. Okay, this particular setup, we're going to be using a set of the 2JZ valve cover dress-up kit from PRP. So we're going to go ahead and install those now. Okay, so we're going ahead, we're just torquing down our valve cover here now. Doesn't feel the best. If you're installing any of these off-brand valve covers, there's one thing to note, whether you're using OEM hardware or the dress-up kit. The valve cover potentially is not designed the best as it should on the factory valve cover in this area here. There's a little bit of an embossed portion, a step out. That way when you compress the valve cover gasket and you contact the valve cover to the head, it actually has a feeling of torque and tight. These ones do not have that, and you could potentially rip a bolt out of the head if you do not pay attention to that. So in that case, these ones are going to kind of be more of a pressure fit. You're not going to get that 100% torque tight feeling, so I'm probably going to advise my client just make sure the valve cover bolts are tight after a couple of heat cycles. In this situation, you're not going to have 100% pressure and a tight zero give feeling. So just something to keep in mind. It's not going to go exactly well if you try to get it up to the factory torque spec, like 6 foot-pounds or whatever it is. So we're just going to get these ones all snug, make sure they're all even. We're not going to get 100% foot-pound on these ones, and we don't want to break a valve cover or rip a bolt out of the head. So we're just going to make sure that we don't over torque these, and then we'll continue on with the second valve cover and repeat everything we did here. Because of the PRP coil pack kit for the R35, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a little bit of install on that. We're going to do the spark plugs, the coils, fitting the coils to the PRP stocks, and then we'll go ahead and install the bracket and the harness, and then get a nice finished product for our client here. So first we're going to do, install the spark plugs. We are going to torque them down, or sorry, we are going to gap them. This is going to be about a 600 horsepower build. There is going to be obviously a spark plug check at a certain point during the tune, but at least we can get them installed, and then he won't have to gap them again. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to gap them to about 25 thou, I think, 0.025, and then we'll install this into the head. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to gap our plugs. We have this little manual gapper here that we can use to push the electrode down, or the grounding strap down, without doing any damage to it, bending left or right. We want it to be nice and square. So we're just going to go ahead, pressure it down a little bit, check with our feeler blade. Push it down a little bit, check with our feeler blade. Now once we get a good gap on the spark plug, we'll go ahead and we'll pop that into the cylinder head. Should be just a little bit of tension when you go to install it. And then that plug is good at that gap. So we'll go ahead now. You can put a little bit of anti-seize on your spark plug if you want. For an application like this with very low mileage, I don't recommend low mileage between changes, between spark plugs. I don't recommend you do it just because it can cause conductivity issues if you put too much. Even if you use a copper paste, it can conduct. So you're going to want to make sure you just use either a conductive anti-seize, or you can just put them in like this on an application like this where you're going to be doing spark plugs often because it is a performance build. We're just going to put them in as is. Now on a JZ or an RB, I typically torque the spark plug down anywhere from 16 to 18 foot-pounds. Start lower on the lower end, and if it feels good, you're probably okay. If you're having issues with spark plugs loosening off when you go to remove them, you're going to want to up the torque a little bit. It does have a little bit of effect on conductivity if they are loose when you do install them. You want to make sure that you crush that sealing ring on the bottom of the spark plug, top of the base of the threads, enough to make sure that it doesn't back off. Okay, once we have that spark plug installed, we're just going to repeat the same steps for all 6, and then we'll move on to installing the coil kit. One thing I forgot to mention, the application. For this application, we're going to be using a NGK BKR7E. That's most likely going to be the right heat range of spark plug to get us to the power level we need without being too cold and too hot. When we do our dyno tuning, we do pull the plugs and assess and see if we need to go hotter or colder at the time. On the dyno, you'll probably get the most heat into the engine at such a warm time. There's not airflow when you're driving on the dyno, so it's not exact replication of what's on the street. So typically the spark plugs will get slightly hotter than they would on the street. So, but for this application, the BKR7E Copperhead non-iridium plug is going to be what we're going to be using on this application. Okay, so when you're doing a PRP R35 coil kit for basically any engine, first thing you're going to do, you're going to pop off the bottom stock here. And we're going to do that because we're trying to save the little resistor that's in here. It's a lot easier than trying to pop the top off. It goes flying and you lose it. So we're going to want to reuse that. This bottom piece here with the spring inside of it can go right into the garbage. And then we're going to remove the top boot from the coil pack, just like that. And then we're going to place our resistor inside the coil again, and then we're going to place our boot onto the coil pack, push it until it's seated, and then now you have your coil pack kit assembly completed, and you're just going to repeat those steps 6 more times, 4 more times, however many times with the type of kit you have for your engine. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and install the bracket to the cylinder head. On the JZ, unfortunately, you do have to install the bracket first and then the coil pack on top. Just because if the coil pack's bolted to the bracket, it covers the bolt hole. So we're going to go ahead now, place this inside. And then we're going to place our coil pack bracket bolt into both holes. These are a countersunk bolt, so they sit below the coil pack nicely. Now this is just an M6 bolt, so don't over torque these. It's going to be about 6-7 foot-pounds max. Okay, once you have your bracket installed, we're going to go ahead and install our coil pack. You're going to want to stack your washers onto your bolt in this order. Lock washer first, then the washer, then into the coil pack, and you're going to want to place your coil pack into the cylinder head. Make sure it goes down into the spark plug. Shouldn't be too much force. There should be some resistance, but not excessive amount. And then you're going to want to thread your bolt into the bracket, and we'll finger tighten all of them, and then we'll torque them all down after. There's a little less space in the billet valve covered channel here than there is on the factory one, so we might have to go ahead and actually install the coil pack harness before we install the coil packs. We're going to try and fit these in here without having to remove the coils here quickly. If that doesn't work, we'll take it out. Okay, once you have your coil pack and coil pack harness installed, we just have to remove a couple coil packs, just lift them up a little bit to plug them in. So no big deal, but we're going to torque them down now to 6 foot-pounds. All right, we just finished up the JZ now here. Finishing off those coil pack install. A little bit of an extra thing, not a common thing you'd be doing on an engine build video, but we did finish this up here. I'd like to thank Mitch, the owner of this engine, for giving us a lot of time and his patience with this build. Coordinating again, filming and doing this stuff takes a very long time, so I appreciate his patience. And we got a good product for him here, so hopefully he's happy with it. On this engine here, we will have a follow-up dyno video when he does bring it back to tune. So that'll be nice to see. On the previous one that we did for the RB26, he was across the country, so we probably won't get a video in-house, but maybe we'll see something on that in the future. But for now, we're finished up here. We're gonna pack this one up, wrap it up, and then have it ready for him to pick up and install into his car. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If I do answer in the comments, I may also answer it in the next video. So if you have any questions on anything we did here, again, we did do a very rapid coverage of this engine. It is very commonly covered, so you don't want to do too much with it. Take too long. There is going to be a lot of, or there was a lot of episodes in this chain here, so it did take some time. But if you do have any other questions on something we didn't cover, or on something that we did cover that you need clarification on, feel free to drop a comment, send me a message. We will take care of it either in the comments or in the next video, and we'll see you in the next one.
Mission.